So again, I want to start off by dedicating our learning to the safety of the hostages, that they should be freed and come home now, and for the safety of our soldiers and the whole Am Yisrael and all of the innocents on both sides.
Amen.
So with that, so last time I said maybe we'll look at the Aruch HaShulchan. So I think since we're in this sugya, I think let's go ahead and look at the Aruch HaShulchan about these halachot. We'll do a few sifim, and then we can continue on in the Gemara. So here we are in the Aruch HaShulchan, Orach Chaim Siman Tafresh Tet Zayin, and we're talking about tinokot, talking about children under the age of mitzvah, regarding inuyim on Yom Kippurim. And so the Aruch HaShulchan says the tinokot mutarim ba'achila u'shtiya v'chein beruchitza v'sicha keshetzrichim lezeh chutz mibnilat sandal. So this is what we got from the Bright and the Gemara, that tinokot are allowed to eat and drink, and they're also allowed to wash and put on oil when they need it. Notice he adds that kishetzuchin lazeh. He'll talk more about that as we go on. Chutz mibnilat sandal, aside from putting on shoes, and he'll explain this in a second, but this just reminds me there was something else I wanted to start with just before I forgot. I think it was last week when we were looking at the Mishnah Brura and the Aruch HaShulchan, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago. We were they both of them mentioned footwear that they were accustomed to wearing on Yom Kippur, and they used terms that I didn't know because I presumed that they were Russian, and I said I have to ask somebody. So I have a friend who's Russian, and she's also a professional translator, and I asked her if she recognized these words. She was kind enough to respond. So the two words, and they were written differently in the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Brura. But remember, the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Brura were contemporaries. They both lived in Russia in the late 19th and early 20th century. And they both talk about the things that they mention the same kinds of footwear that people would wear on Yom Kippur. So one second. I'll share this with you. So the one where Koloshin, or it was written either Koloshin or Kolasin. So she told me there's a Kolashi which when I looked at them, I realized it's galoshes, Kolashi or galoshes. And that's what they are. They're rubberized. And the Aruch HaShulchan says they're made from he spells it Gimel Vav Mem Aleph. So you would think he's maybe saying gome, which is reeds or rushes, but he means gumi. He means they're made from rubber. And so these are galoshes, and you see they're lined. You could just wear them as is. You could just put your foot in them as is, or you could put socks on and put them on. So apparently this is one of the things that people would wear on Yom Kippur. And the other one...
Shel?
Sure.
In German there is a word Galoschen. Galoschen is some kinds of footwear. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that
Well, in English we have
Mostly poor people would use
so
this
maybe it's not the
galoshen.
same. I understand. I
Maybe in
can't,
Yiddish they have the same word, or
so
something similar.
so in English we have the word galosh or galoshes.
Mhm.
And these we would describe these as galoshes. It's not a word that's commonly used anymore. It's a little dated, but basically it's a rubberized piece of footwear, and they're designed to be put over your regular shoes,
Ah, okay.
right? So that
There,
those are
there are Haredim using such kind. When it's raining, suddenly raining, they put something,
I
something
have
in
them.
the.
I mean, I
Are
have
you used it? Okay.
we used to have, like when I was a kid, we had them. We would also call them rubbers, right?
Mhm.
Michael, I see Michael Schwartz is
Yeah,
nodding
yeah,
his.
yeah. Us too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we would have rubbers, and sometimes they were just big, they were just enough to cover your shoe, or there were also boots that would go, over the shoe and up your ankle. And I have those. I still use those myself. But that's the word. So the word in Russian is koloshi. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right in Russian. But that's what it is. It was a great revelation when she told me that. And the other word that both the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Berurah use is valik or valikis. Valikis, I guess, would be the plural. And yeah, right. So the Aruch HaShulchan says min minal mi gomen, but she figured out that in Russian now that she told me valiki or valik in Russian. She told me, she says it's galil mistovev. It's a turning cylinder. So that's not what it means. But she said, but then I guess she thought about it and she said there's the word valenki or valenki. I'm not sure how you say it, and they are it's footwear that's made um, wool. In other words, and this is basically it's felt, and we saw this is one of the definitions of the valik, that they're made from felt. And this is a picture. This is what they look like. So I think now I have to talk to her a little bit more about how these are used. But see, we only touched a little bit on this discussion. But if you remember, this was the sugya that we did previously that was about that included Sandal Shel Sha'am, and then we had the Mishnah of Akiteya, Vakav Shelo, and all of that. And I showed you, I think, in the Aruch HaShulchan that there were three main opinions in the Rishonim about that, and that we hold like the opinion of the Rif, which is also the opinion of the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch, that any kind of footwear that's made not from leather is okay to wear on Yom Kippur. But he mentioned that there are other opinions. The Baal HaMor held that actually you can't wear anything that you might use like a shoe. The Baal HaMor held was asur on Yom Kippur. And then there was a kind of a middle ground. But then it also that discussion gets more complicated when you bring in other factors about where you're allowed to wear the shoes. Are you allowed? And this is even on Shabbat. Are you allowed to wear them anywhere? Like, can you walk from your house into the Rishut Rabim, or are you allowed to only wear them in the house, or can you wear them in the house and into a mavoi? So I told you back then, and I'm not going to do it today. We're not going to get into all those details, but the reason I mention in this context is because these kinds of shoes that are made from wool or from felt, there is discussion about where you're allowed to wear them. Are you also? And I'll also just throw in. Apparently, sometimes these felt boots or these felt shoes were also covered with leather. So if they're covered with leather, so of course they're asur. But here, this is a case where they weren't covered with leather. So this is before the age of Crocs, but you know, every they had non-leather. These were common non-leather pieces of footwear that were used in Russia, and we have testimony from both the Mishnah Berurah and Aruch HaShulchan, and these are things that they might have worn on Yom Kippur. Anyway, I wanted to start off with that, but I only remembered now that we were looking at.
Yeah, just I checked what is Galoschen in German.
Yes.
And they are Gummiüberschuhe. That means that that's footwear
over.
You put over the other foot, and they are made of gummy.
Yes. So it's the same. So that's the same as in English, and we also use that term in English, overshoe.
You used overshoe.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a common term. Maybe Michael Werner is going to weigh in, but it's not something. No, I just mean. I just mean overshoes. Galoshes and overshoes, in my opinion, in my experience, are dated. I remember them from when I was a kid, and I'm 60. How old am I? 66 years old. I had to think for a second. I'm going to turn 67 soon. Actually, I just got a letter from Bituach Leumi telling me that I should start to apply for Kitzbat Zikna. So I'll have to look into that. Anyway, so I see it's the same in German, and
But you have to do teum mas because you are still earning money somewhere.
Yeah, I decided that I should do it, but I think I have to be in touch with my accountant before I do it. And if I get in touch with him now, the first thing he'll say to me is, I need your stuff for for Esrim Stein, because I still haven't done my Doch Mas for last year. So before I have to get that ready, and then I'll talk to him, and then he'll tell me what to do. Anyway, okay. All that to say, I don't know. It's just interesting to me. The whole thing is interesting to me. It's one of the other things that's interesting to me is that in my experience, and you can also tell me your experience, but I think that what's most common nowadays is people get any type of shoe they want as long as it's not made of leather. And that is like the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. We saw this it is one of the commonly accepted piskei dinim, that it doesn't matter. It can, in other words, what do I mean? It doesn't matter. It means that it can be comfortable. You're allowed to wear something comfortable. You're allowed to wear something where you don't feel the hardness of the ground. Right. This is something else that we talked about, that the Rambam talked about. That generally we go with the lenient opinion on this nowadays, and it's not a huge area of discussion, except, like I said, that I heard in the name of Rav Yashiv that he said you shouldn't wear Crocs. I didn't look to see exactly what he wrote or said, but I just mentioned it because to say that, of course, that's there. We see that's based on Rishonim. It's not stam that he would have said that. There are opinions that say that you shouldn't wear something that's so comfortable. It would seem to me even I believe even the Baal Amor, who's the most machmir, I think would still agree that you're allowed to wrap a cloth around your foot. That he would allow. That anything that's really like a shoe, he would not allow. But okay, nowadays we do what we do. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it as well, because in the next part of the sugya, the Gemara is going to introduce the exception to the case even for adults, which is going to be if you're walking in a place where you're worried that you might be attacked by a scorpion, or you might be stung by a scorpion, then you're allowed to cover your feet even with a leather shoe. So we'll see that later. For now, let's go back to this and we'll talk about children. התינוקות מותרים באכילה, שתייה וכן ברחיצה ושיחה כשצריכים לזה, חוץ מבנילת הסנדל. So, and why נילת הסנדל? שראוי לחנכן. It's proper to educate them. מפני שאין חוששים לזה כל כך. Because we're not worried about this so much. In other words, what? שהרבה פעמים גם בלא יום הכיפורים אינו עולין סנדל. In other words, we're not so worried to be machmir about children not wearing shoes on Yom Kippur, because sometimes even when it's not Yom Kippur, they don't wear shoes. So, why should we not include this in chinuch, that even young children could go without wearing leather shoes for a day? Right? Why not educate them about this on this holy day? Obviously, they need to eat, so we're not machmir about that. Regarding washing and putting on oil, that really depends on what they're accustomed to. Nowadays, our children are not accustomed to this. So if you remember, right, in the Gemara, this was what Abai said, my mother told me that very young children, you have to give them hot water and oil. In other words, and smear them with oil, implying that that's something you do every day because that was essential for their growth, for their proper growth. But the Aruch HaShulchan says nowadays we don't do that anyway, even on a regular day. So why should we do it on Yom Kippur? So based on that, it's proper that we educate them about this. Gamkein, about this also, Vizman HaChinuch, and the time of when we start to educate them, that I'll explain later in Sif Dalit. In other words, from what age do you start to withhold certain things from the child? So it goes on in Sif Bet, Okay, so now he explains. So remember, when we were learning the Gemara, it said Tinokot Mutarim Bekol, and then we had a somewhat detailed discussion about what that meant. Did that mean that they had to feed themselves, or did it mean that an adult can feed them? And for all the Inuyim, is the adult the one who washes them? Is the adult the one who puts on their shoes? And so the assumption was that because we're dealing with all children under the age of mitzvah, including infants, it has to include the possibility that adults are doing it for them. So here he says, regarding eating and drinking, that an adult can feed them and give them to drink. And we're not gozer that they're going to come to eat themselves the way we would be about kamo b'chametz b'Pesach when Nazir b'yayin. In other words, on Pesach, you could also say, look, a child on Pesach is allowed to eat bread, right? And the child of a Nazir, we don't have this anymore. The child of a Nazir is not forbidden. It's not just wine, because the Nazir is also not allowed to eat grapes, right? So, but the children of the Nazir, they should be able to eat grapes. But we're machmir about that, that we don't let them feed their children things that are asur to them. To lo dami, it's not the same. So why are we machmir about not letting our children eat bread on Pesach? But we're not. Why are we machmir about that? But we're not machmir about feeding them on Yom Kippur when we're not allowed to eat. It's not the same. To b'sham kol machanim ochel, because there they eat all the foods. And so we're afraid that they're going to eat this as well. Mash'en can be on the Kippurim, that which is not true on Yom Kippur. In other words, on Pesach, what's the difference? You explain to me. What's the difference between feeding your child bread on Pesach or feeding your child on Yom Kippur anything? Why should I make that differentiation?
I don't understand. On Pesach, children are allowed to eat bread, but you are not allowed to have bread in your house. So
Okay.
how are you going to feed them bread? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, that's a good point.
Not only bread, all chametz. Yes.
Okay. So you're not allowed to own. You're not allowed to own the bread,
Chametz.
the chametz on Pesach, but even things that. But they could get it from somewhere else. But we still, the chinuch is that you don't let them eat. You don't let them eat that on Pesach. And also, I could say, what about things that are d'Rabbanan, that are okay? But let's say, what's the difference between Pesach and Yom Kippur in this regard? Aside from what Paul said.
On Pesach, they're not eating chametz. There's still plenty of other things that they can eat, and they can still be perfectly fine. Whereas in Yom Kippur, they have to eat.
Okay, so on Pesach, right? Right. So on Pesach, we're eating, and they're eating. So if we limit the specific foodstuffs that they eat to be like what we don't eat, it's not really a problem for us or for them. But in that case, so why not be machmir and say that we should limit what they're allowed to eat? We should limit it the same way that we're limited. But yes, like you say, on Yom Kippur, we don't eat at all. But the children have to eat. So it's a fundamental difference. So if we, in other words, we're afraid that if we, on Pesach, if we let them eat bread, then, maybe we'll also come to eat bread. On Yom Kippur, it's not the same. Aside from the fact that it's altogether different, because on Yom Kippur we don't eat at all, but they have to eat, and we have emat hadin. In other words, we have the fear of judgments, the day of judgment, and so we're not worried that people are going to come to eat anything just because they're feeding their children. Masha'en ken on Pesach, that if we let them feed them, if we let them eat bread, that the adult might also eat bread. There's a kind of a parallel idea, which maybe I shouldn't get into, but there's a machloket at the beginning of Masechet Pesachim about exactly why are we doing b'dikat chametz and Pesach. You know what? I'm not going to get into it. Maybe I'll come back to it. I didn't prepare.
But Shel, by the way, on Pesach, if you have a dog, we had a dog, you feed him with dog food, which is it's not
which is not
chametz. Pesach, but it doesn't contain chametz.
Right.
They have special food for and I guess it's the same for cows or whatever you have in your meshek also.
Yes. Yeah. It's the same, and it's because of what you said. Because you're not allowed to own the chametz. It's not because your dog isn't allowed to eat it. Your dog's allowed to eat the bread.
He's allowed. He's not a Jew.
He's allowed. He's not a Jew. Which reminds me of a very funny joke, but I won't tell it now.
Also, the dogs who are living with Jews, they are almost Jews.
That's part of the joke. If we have time at the end, and I remember, I'll tell you the joke about the dog. But no, like I say on Pesach, but it's not even if you don't own bread, you wouldn't necessarily have to keep your child from eating bread. But nonetheless, we make we do for chinuch we do, and it's not seen and basically we're saying why shouldn't we? Because it's not really it's not a hardship on the child to not eat bread for a week. V'yesh mishrotze. Okay, and also so and then on Yom Kippur, nonetheless we allow you to feed whatever food you want to your child, even though you can't eat it all, and we're not worried that you will come to eat. We're not worried about that because you aren't going to eat anything on Yom Kippur. Masha'en ken on Pesach, you are eating. If we allow your child to eat some, a given thing, then maybe you'll also come to eat it. But on Yom Kippur, you're not eating anything, and so you already make a differentiation. And on top of that, because Yom Kippur is so chamur, right? It's Yamim Noraim, it's Ematadin. So we're not worried that you're going to make a mistake and start to eat just because you're feeding your child. And there are people who are machmir about that you shouldn't feed your child directly, but that's not really the main din. But if the children are old enough and they don't need you to feed them, then you can prepare their food and let them eat by themselves. And not because it's asur for you to feed them, but because of the trouble that you'll go to, in other words, on Yom Kippur, where you shouldn't be toreach for preparing food if you don't have to. Why should he do himself something that he doesn't have to do? So your children are old enough that they can feed themselves, then you make sure that they have food. You don't have to actually feed them. But if it's an infant, obviously you have to feed the infant. So it's permitted. But you see already he's building the tashtit, the foundation for these gradations that we're going to have about when you feed your children and when you stop and when they have to start fasting. Okay, so that's about feeding, and he'll come back to it again. But regarding washing and putting on oil, the Jew should not do it for himself to the child. When he's washing, right? So if you're giving your baby a bath, so your hands are also getting washed. So you're also getting some hana'ah, and you shouldn't get hana'ah from washing on Yom Kippur. So that's why he should say to a non-Jew to do this, and we mentioned this earlier. Meaning, in this instance, you can say this directly to the goy. You don't have to hint to them. You can say to them, on Yom Kippur, I want you to wash my child. Please wash my child. You don't have to say, well, it would be nice if my child was clean today. You don't have to do that kind of thing when you're talking about like a Shabbos goy. Here it's permitted. And why is it permitted? Because it's permitted l'chatchila for the child to wash and to put on oil on Yom Kippur. Yesh misha omer. There is somebody who says the Gama Yisrael ba'atzmo mutar l'rochtzan u'sochan. In fact, the Bach holds that the Jew himself is allowed to wash and put on oil for them. That's not really called enjoyment for the parent or the adult who's doing it. V'yesh mish mechalek ben chamin letzonein, and there's also somebody who says that it matters whether you're washing them in hot water or in cold water. The isur ena el mishum inui. The isur comes about because of this idea of inui, of affliction. Kevan shehutra latinokot r'shai lasot b'atzmo. And since it's permitted to wash or to put oil on the child, so then it also becomes permitted for him, the person, him or her, the person who's doing the washing or the anointing. But if you're doing the washing with cold water, but if you want to wash the child in hot water, which on Shabbos is also asur, or I would put in parentheses, or it's at least problematic, right? Because you're not allowed to heat up the water on Shabbos. And washing the whole body on Shabbos, even if the water was heated up before, is also asur. So that, if you want to wash the child in hot water, you should tell a non-Jew to do it. That's what the Magen Avraham says. But the Aruch HaShulchan points out, like we learned in the Gemara, the Ilya Rabbah, that's Aleph Reish in the parentheses here. This is a comment of the Ilya Rabbah, who was a commentary on the Levush, but Toch Kadeh, he also comments on the Shulchan Aruch and people who wrote on the Shulchan Aruch. Anyway, the point is, because what did in the Gemara, what did it say? Abaye said Amali Aim, and the first thing that his mother told him was Chamime, right? Chamime v'mashcha, hot water. Chamime, like chamim, chamime v'mashcha, hot water and oil are things that are necessary for the child. So clearly, when the Gemara was talking about washing children and the need to wash children even on Yom Kippur, they meant washing them in hot water. Anyway, Yesh Efresh men Shabbat Yom Tov, Amnam Medina Ata Ein Nafkamina. So the bottom line is, he says, halacha nowadays, there's really no difference between hot water and cold water. Dena tinokot shalanu murgalin beruchitza b'sicha, because our children aren't accustomed to washing and putting on oil, v'asur, and so it's forbidden. What does he mean that they're not accustomed? It means they didn't wash every day. They didn't wash their bodies every day, just like adults didn't wash their bodies every day. People could go for many days without taking a bath or washing or whatever. So even though Abaye's mother told him that this is absolutely necessary for the upbringing of the child, but he says, we don't do this anymore. Okay.
But you change the nappies of babies.
So here's the thing.
You have to clean them. And maybe also to use mishra or something like this.
Yeah. So okay. So let's talk about it practically. So of course, even in the time of the Aruch HaShulchan, if it was an infant, you would have to, right? Somebody who's not Torah trained, of course, you have to. Michael Werner, are you still with us? Sort of. Okay. You would still have to wash them. But he's talking here about washing the whole body. I think this is the reference. So if washing off the right, washing off the the child's bottom after they've defecated or after they've urinated, of course that's permitted. It's permitted for us. It's permitted for an adult, right? We already discussed that. If you're dirty, you're allowed to wash off your dirt even on Yom Kippur. What you're talking here about Rechitza v'sicha is Rechitza v'sicha lahana'a. And in the context, what it means is to wash. It's to wash for the sake of washing. It's washing in the way it's brought down in the Gemara from Abaye's mother, is that this is something that's necessary for the child. And this is also what he means, that nowadays we don't necessarily do this. So now I would turn this around and say, okay, but what about now in 2023? Nowadays, actually, we do wash every day. And when my children are little, I gave them a bath every night. So I think that here, arguably, some of these things have changed again. And what it reminds me of also is, so let's say Ashkenazim, we don't, we don't take showers, right, during the 9 days. There's an inyan not to take showers during the 9 days. But and there also it's talking about washing the whole body, except maybe on Erev Shabbat Chazon, where you're allowed to wash, and then there's a discussion if you're allowed with hot water or with cold water. But the halacha there says if you're an istanis, if you're like a frail person, then an istanis is allowed to wash. And I've seen poskim. I actually have spoken to poskim and to rabbis and say nowadays most people are in this category of istanis, even though we don't think of ourselves as frail people. But we live in a time when people are so accustomed to taking a shower every day that going without a shower for a week is a tremendous hardship, and people suffer. And so a lot of poskim say, no, okay, nowadays you're allowed to take a shower, and they'll say what you should do is take either a cold shower or not take a shower that's not as hot as you're accustomed to. In other words, you should make some kind of a difference. But the point is, our modern reality with indoor plumbing and hot water, on demand, it's a very different reality than it was 100 years ago. So some of these things change. Okay, so now he talks about when do you start training your child to fast. So he says, even though we do feed the children, we train them by hours. So let's say you normally feed your child breakfast at, let's say, 7 o'clock in the morning. So on Yom Kippur, you feed them at 8 o'clock in the morning. You let them go another hour. Or right? So in other words, whatever they're normally accustomed, whenever they are normally accustomed to eating, you put off giving them breakfast. Why? Putting off feeding them for an hour is, we're not worried about their health. Even not on Yom Kippur, sometimes you end up feeding them late anyway. So on Yom Kippur, you can purposely feed them late. And you, according to the strengths of the child, in other words, you have to figure based on your child and how well you know your child, how long that they can go without food. And that's how much you make them wait before you feed them. And he says, right? In case it wasn't clear, he says this is also true for girl children, right? And this kind of chinuch of feeding them later, it starts from when they're 9 years old and up, below kodem, and not earlier than that. This kind of, I'm going to paraphrase here, this kind of education of making them wait it's not really pertinent for such a young child. You have to wait till they're old enough. And I think the implication here is it's both that they're old enough physically that it's not going to hurt them to wait another hour to eat. I think it also is a nod to the fact that a 9-year-old child already has a better comprehension of what Yom Kippur is and why that day is different. And I don't know, I remember myself when I was a child, but also with my children and now with my grandchildren, I can tell you, by the time, sometimes it's earlier, but by the time the child is 9 and they're being brought up in a household where everybody's going to fast, there's I don't know if it's universal, but there's a tendency that they also want to fast. They want to do what the adults are doing. And they see it as a sign of pride that they don't have to eat right. That and what's the point? That they're also saying about themselves, I'm not that child anymore. I'm not just a little child. I'm more like an adult. And so based on that, you can tell them when they should eat and so forth. Vizel Lashon HaTur, this is how the Tur says, Tinok habari mechanchin oto l'shaot bishnat 10 ו-11, בשנת 12 ו-13. So if the child is healthy, then you start training them by hours. This whole idea of putting them off by hours. From the 10th year. What's the 10th year? When they're 9 and a day. That's the 10th year, right? That's another way of putting it. So basically, when they're 9 and they're 10, or they're 12 and they're 13, 9, 10, 11. I'm sorry. V'yud Aleph b'shnat Yud Bet v'Yud Gimel mashlim midrabanan. I didn't read that right. So you start the chinuch when they're 9 and 10, and then when they're 11 and 12, in other words, in their 12th and 13th year, they should finish the fast midrabanan. In other words, they're not chayav midioraita until they're 13, and if it's a boy, not until he's 13 and a day, which would be Shnat Yud Dalet, the 14th year, is when they're 13 in a day. So they're supposed to be mashlim when they're 11 and they're 12 midrabanan, and in the 14th year they have to finish the fast midioraita. V'acholeh, the sick, meaning the sickly child, if he's a sickly child, klomar she'eno chazak lisbol hata'anit, if he's not strong enough to withstand the fast, so if he's sickly, we don't start him when he's 9 and 10. We start him when he's 10 or 11, right? The 11th year and the 12th year. In the 13th year, which is when he's 12, he finishes at midrabanan. Vishnat Yud Daled, when he's 13 and a day, then he finishes at midioraita. Vahatinoket, and the girl, shememaher dichashev gedola kodem hatinok, the girl becomes, she matures more quickly than the boy, shana achat, by 1 year. Habriya, if she's in good health. So mechanchin ota l'shaot bishnat 9 ו-10. In other words, we start teaching her to withhold food when she's 8 and 9, in her 9th year and her 10th year, when she's 8 and 9, and then in her 11th year, and in the 11th year, when she's 10. And the Yud Bet, when she's 11, in her 12th year, she finishes midrabanan. Yud Gimel, in her 13th year, when she's 12, Mishalemet midioraita. Then she finishes the fast midioraita. If she's a sickly girl, then we instruct her using this idea of sha'ot from her 9th year, V'yud Aleph in the 9th year, and when she's 9 and when she's 10, when her 10th year and 11th year, and she's Mishalem Midurabanan Bishnat Yud Bet, and then she finishes the whole fast when she's 11, Miduraita Bishnat Yud Gimel. She finishes Miduraita when she's in her 13th year, when she's 12. Okay. The same way that we do chinuch about eating and drinking for them, we also do about washing and anointing. So that's the shita of the tour. Aval Harambam beperek sheni halacha yud katav. He wrote like this: Katan ben teshu haneser mechanchin oto l'shaot v'chulei ben yud al shana ben zachar ben nekeva mitaneh umashlim midivrei sofrim. So he says a katan who's 9 or 10, then you're mechanech l'fi sha'ot. But once they're 11, whether it's a boy or a girl, they fast and they finish the fast midivrei sofrim, like midurabanan, kedei l'chadcho b'mitzvot. But yud bet shana v'yom echad, if it's a girl and she's 12 in a day, uven yud gimel shana v'yom echad, or a boy who's 13 in a day, sheheviu shtei sa'arot, that have 2 hairs, meaning that they've also started to grow pubic hair. And arehen kigdolim l'chol hamitzvot. Once they reach that age, they're like adults for all the mitzvot. Umashlimim min Torah. Then they have to finish midioraita. Avalim lo heviu shtei sa'arot adayin ktanim heim ve'enam mashlimim ela midivrei sofrim. So this is, I don't know if this has ever come up in Shir before, but this is one of the simanim that of adulthood. It's not pure in reality, in principle. Considering when a boy or a girl is really chayav b'mitzvot, it's not only their age; it has to be their age and the sign of puberty. That is, they have to be starting to grow pubic hair. They have to have at least 2 pubic hairs. So the Rambam mentions that here in this context, and he makes it very specific. Even if they've reached the age, but they haven't started to have this sign of puberty, then they're still considered to be minors. They're still considered to be children, and they don't have to finish the fast except midurabanan. And a child who's less than 9, Ein ma'anino to b'Yom Kippurim. We don't make him suffer. In other words, he doesn't fast on Yom Kippur. We don't even withhold food from him lefi sha'ot. Kedei shelo yavo lidei sakana. And here the Rambam says, because less than that, less than 9 years old or less, we're worried that if they don't eat or they don't eat on time, that might be damaging to their health. But even if the child wants to be machmir on themselves, we don't let him. The Rambam says if the child's less than 9, we don't let them fast even if they want, because it could endanger their health. Okay. I think this is enough about this, even though I see there's only one more seif. All right, maybe there's only one more seif, so Im Kvar, let's finish. Even though I think, Michael Werner, I've lost you again. I know you're trying, but you keep nodding off. And I'm not sure about Paul. No, Paul's still with us. Okay.
No. This time I had a little sleep before the show.
Oh, okay, good.
I hope it helps. I'm not sure.
All right, you know what I'll do for this? I'll try to read it through without just like doing an offhand translation. So he says there are some of the rabbis that hold that Midra Banan there isn't leka hashlama klal. In other words, that Midra Banan there isn't really no such thing as making the child finish the whole fast. And they hold like Rabbi Yochanan and the Gemara, and we didn't get to that sugya yet. We'll get to it a little later. And this is the minhag ha'olam. This is the general minhag. Rabbeinu Rama katav diyeshi smoch alayo benashu kachush ve'ino chazak lihitanot. Rama says you can rely on this opinion that a child, in other words, a child who's not yet a bar bat mitzvah, that you don't have to make them finish the fast, even if it's a year or two before, if they're a little bit sickly. And the Aruch HaShulchan says, and now, says nowadays, we see that most children are in fact somewhat weak, and we don't make them finish the fast. But we do this thing of feeding them later, because there's nobody who disagrees with that. So now, what if you don't know if your child yet has the sign of puberty? What if you know they passed their 12th birthday for a girl or their 13th birthday for a boy? You don't really know if they have these hairs or not. So actually, he says halacha l'maaseh is the chuyavim litanot min Torah. There's a chiyuv that they do have to fast midioraita. The kol sheba leklal shanim chazaka shehevi simanim. There's a general assumption that once the child has reached these ages, for the boy and the girl respectively, the chazak is that they do have the signs of puberty. And even if we don't now see these simanim, we're afraid that maybe they actually did grow the hair, and maybe that hair fell off, because sveka dioraita the chumra, because now this is a suffix dioraita whether or not they have to fast. And so we're machmir to say that they also have to fast. Even if afilhu rach v'kachush, even if he's soft and weak. Even if he turned 13 on Yom Kippur, maybe that was his birthday, right? You still have to make them fast. Unless we know for certain that they didn't have their pubic hair. And on the other hand, if for certain we're talking about a boy or a girl who's past the age of bar bat mitzvah, we know for sure that they're old enough, and we know for sure even they have signs of puberty. But we say of them that they won't be able to suffer the fast, and they'll get sick. Yishalu barofim, then you have to ask doctors. Then they become like any other adult who's sick, and you have to ask doctors. And in this, there's no difference between a boy and a girl. Okay, and that whole thing about asking doctors, we have yet to get to that sugya in the Gemara, so we're going to wait till we look at that. All right, so that's more or less the summary of the last sugya in halacha. Let's now no, not that one. Just a second. Let's continue in the Gemara. Just have to remember which. Oh, wait. It's one of these. It's this one. There we go. All right. I still think that one of the greatest things that we've learned so far is that Rabbi used to buy cracked pottery for his little kid to break. I have to tell my I have to tell my children who have children. They could,
And I think the second greatest thing is that they died with their boots on.
that they died with their boots on.
Remember from last week, you sleep with your shoes and your meat, your toast.
That say it again. That
We learned last week, was this Rava as well, that that people don't sleep with their shoes on. They like
that they right. Okay, yeah, okay. So they didn't die, but they tasted the taste of death. Yeah. That's also I think that's fascinating also, that whole like what's behind that. I tried to look to see if anybody commented on that, and I have a feeling that maybe if I would dig a little bit outside of some of the more traditional Meforshim, that maybe we could find more of the Babylonian folklore.
But also, like, I mean, in a desert environment, when there's a lot of dust, I mean, you come and you wash your feet.
Yeah. Wait. Oh, you mean that's why they take their shoes off?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, Shmuel didn't. I don't know that he lived in a desert environment. He lived in Bavel, but yeah, we know from the Torah that that's what Avram said. That's what Avram said to the Malachim, right? He said, "Come in," and he he said, "Wash your legs, wash your feet." Anyway, but yeah, this idea that wearing shoes all night is like tasting the taste of death. I find that really fascinating. I don't know what that's about. I have some idea, but purely speculative. Anyway, we're going to move on. So we discussed these Inuyim, and now we've also discussed the Inuyim in regards to children. So if we remember back in the Mishnah, we're up to the third line of the Mishnah. So the king and the Kala, the woman who's just married, wash their face. The woman who just gave birth puts on her shoe. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, v'chachamim osrim. Chachamim say it's asur. So we discussed this at the time. Rashi says, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, akulhu kai, melech v'kala v'chaya. When Rabbi Eliezer says that achayati nolata sandal, it's not that he said all three. He said the melech, the kala wash their face, and the chaya puts on her shoe. And the chachamim osrin. So then the question is, what were the chachamim oser? Were they oser all three, or were they oser only the last one of nilata sandal for the chaya? So first, though, the Gemara here is going to talk about why is it that the melech and the kala wash their face. So melech and kala yechatzu et pneihem matnitin mani. So the Gemara first wants to know matnitin mani, who is our Mishnah? Right? Literally, who is our Mishnah? It's who is the author of our Mishnah that says that the king and the kala wash their face. The Gemara says it's Rabbi Hananya ben Tradionhi, Titania, because we learn in a Braita, Hamelch the kala lo yirchetzu et b'neihem. So the Tanakam of the Braita says that no, the king and the kala are not allowed to wash their face. Rabbi Hananya ben Tradion Omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Hananya ben Tradion said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Hamelch the kala yirchetzu et b'neihem. So that's one part of the Braita. The next part is Achaya lo tino et sandal. Rabbi Chananya ben Chadion omer mishin Rabbi Yozer Achaya tino et sandal. Okay, so now we see from the Braita, before we go on in the Gemara, we see from the Braita the proof of what Rashi said on the Mishnah, that when the Mishnah said Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, it went on all three cases, the Melech, the Kala, and the Chaya. Okay, so now I have proof, because I have a Braita where this is Meforash. The Rabbi Chananya ben Tradion said those halachot in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so now the Gemara says, "My taima melech." So what's the reason for the king? What are they asking? What does it mean? What's the reason for the king?
Why is the king permitted to wash his face? Yom Kippur.
Right, or even to say a little bit stronger, it doesn't say, the Mishnah doesn't say Hamelch v'Kala mutarin lirchotz. It says Hamelch v'Kala yirchitzu et peneihem. What's the implication?
That they have to. It's not just that they're permitted, but they have to.
They have to wash. That is the implication. So what's the reason for the king? Why does the king have to wash? Tichtiv melch biyafio techazen einecha. This is a pasuk that we saw quoted earlier, that the king in his beauty, your eyes will see. In other words, there's an idea that for people to look at the king, he has to be in a state of beauty. Always. He always has to be presentable. So that includes even on Yom Kippur. So even though this is something that's mentioned in Yeshaya, and it's, you might say that, okay, that it's not mentioned in the Torah. What's the basis from me bringing a pasuk from Yeshaya to support this idea that the king must wash his face? So I think I asked that in kind of a convoluted way. We touched on this much earlier, I must like a couple of months ago, but the Inuyim, if you remember, we went through a Rad, Rabbeinu Nisim, in his comments on the Mishnah, about the Shar Inuyim, the Inuyim other than eating and drinking, if they're D'oraita or D'Rabbanan. So here we have this idea that the king has to wash his face. And it's based on a pasuk in Yeshaya. So what would that indicate to you about whether Rechitza is D'oraita or D'Rabbanan on Yom Kippur?
It's just as to Rabbanan.
Because, why do you say that?
There is no warrant, certainly in Chumash. In order to be Rabbanan, there need to be a source in Chumash, generally.
You mean if it was to be D'oraita?
Exactly.
Right? If it was to be D'oraita. So here's the thing. Earlier in the sugya, though, we brought proofs about Inuyim, and what, we had to go through each Inui and bring a proof text about how it is considered, why it's considered to be in. What's the proof text that shows us that it's in an Inui? So if we go back and look at the proof text for washing, it wasn't actually, first of all, it wasn't actually a pasuk from the Torah itself, so it fits in with what you're saying. And here also, the other point is, though, that if the Torah expressly forbade washing on Yom Kippur, I would not be able to bring an exception to that from a pasuk in Nevi'im. this pasuk melech v'yafyo techazen einecha, I'm bringing it to say there's an exception for rechitza on Yom Kippur for the king. I see it from this pasuk that because the king always has to be biyofyo, that means that he has to wash also on Yom Kippur. So that seems to indicate, it's a good indication, you might say, that the whole Isur of Rechitza on Yom Kippur must be Durabanan, because otherwise, how could I bring a pasuk from Yeshaya to go against an Isur Dioraita? And I think we'll revisit that maybe next time. But for right now, let's just say that seems to be a good indication. So that's the reason why the king has to wash on Yom Kippur. Kala maitama. What's the reason for the kala? Why is it that the kala has to wash? Kedei shelo titkaneh ba'ala. So that she'll not look ugly in the face of, in the eyes of her husband. Why is that important?
They're newlyweds and they want to get things off to a good start, I guess.
Okay, so at the most simple level, yeah, we don't want them to start off the marriage where there's some kind of friction between them, because now the kala doesn't look nice to the husband. It's a very you might say very chauvinistic take on what's going on. But in that chauvinistic frame, let's also understand what would be the ramifications if she did become ugly in the eyes of her husband. Maybe he'll want to divorce her. Maybe he'll say, this isn't what I signed up for when when we got married, I thought you were beautiful, and here you're not beautiful. And then maybe he'll quick to divorce her. And that would be, again, in a patriarchal society, that would be really bad for the wife. In other words, we're not necessarily assuming that these people got married because they love each other to begin with. They got married, for whatever societal reason they got married. And the idea is that we're also concerned about the welfare of the kala, and that we don't want her to be either divorced, or even if like Michael said, even if she's not divorced, but we don't want her to be in a bad position vis-a-vis her husband. It's also interesting to note that for the king, we bring a pasuk, and for the kala, we don't need to bring a pasuk, we just bring reasoning. It's just sound reasoning. And here also, it seems to indicate that the isur of rechitza must be dirabanan in general. And so based on that, I can bring a reason about why it doesn't apply in certain situations. The Gemara continues, Amale Rav le Rabbi Chia. So Rav said to Rabbi Chia, Kala ad kama. Kala until when? Until how much? So what is he asking? What does he mean until how much?
How long she's considered a newlywed, how long the couple are newlyweds.
Right. Why don't we ask this about the king?
I assume it holds forever.
Yeah, with the king, he's always king, so he doesn't get any days off. So he always has to be biyafyo. But the kala, how long is she considered to be a kala that we're going to tell her she should wash on Yom Kippur? So Rabbi Chia says to Rav, Amalei Keditanya, it's like we learned in a Braita, Ein monin tachshitin min hakala kol 30 yom. We don't hold back tachshitin, which usually we translate as jewelry, but it means any kind of like beautification for the kala for the entire 30 days. Now it's 30 days from the time she gets married. And what does he mean, Kiditanya, like we learn in a Braita? So Rashi explained, in other words, let me phrase that more carefully. Rabbi Chia says, Kiditanya, like we learned in the Braita, he could have said, Amarle, Tanya, we learned in a Braita, Ein lonin tachshitin min akalat kol 30 yom. So tachshitin, in this context, in our context of Yom Kippur, that could also include, in other words, anything that would beautify the kala. So that would include washing. What does he mean, kiditanya, like we learned in the Braita? Because he's bringing, as Rashi is going to explain, he's bringing the Braita from a completely different context about kala. So let's look at Rashi, and then I think that will be, well, we'll see. I'll try to stick in this last part here. Ein monin tachshitin kiditanya. Braita he. This is a Braita. Maitinan la beresh betula niseit. It's brought in the Gemara at the beginning of the parak that begins betula niseit, which is the first parak of Ktubot. And what does it say there, Michael Werner? You don't know. That's right. That's fine, because I haven't read it yet. Harei she'aya tivcho tavuach. Let's say his slaughtering was slaughtered, v'yeno mazug, his wine was poured, and umeit aviv shel chatan, o ima shel kala. Let's say, and then the father of the groom or the mother of the bride died. So what are we talking about? This is the beginning of Ktubot, and it's saying that if the wedding preparations were not just prepared, but they were ready now. In other words, on the eve of the Suda of the Chatan V'Kala, they had already slaughtered the animal to have meat. They already poured the wine, and Yeno Mazug here doesn't mean just that they poured, it means that they added water to the wine, which is what you do just before you drink it. And then all of a sudden, the father of the groom or the mother of the bride dies. So what do? Now you have a problem, because on the one hand, they haven't gotten married yet, but they want to get married. If they don't get married now, what will happen?
All the preparations for the Suda will go to waste.
Right. And that's it could be a considerable amount of money. It could be like a lot of investment went into this. So it's not so simple. So, nowadays we know this, and it was true back then as well. And remember, like once you slaughtered an animal, it's not like you could say, oh, well, we'll freeze it until we need it. They didn't have that option. You had to eat that meat like basically within a day or two. So what happens? So what you do, you have to take the dead body, put it into a room, and then you bring the chatan v'kala under the chuppah. They get married, uboel bilat mitzvah, and they have their first marital union, uporesh, and then they separate. So, in other words, you go through with the wedding per se, with the actual chuppah, so that they can have the suda that they've prepared, or at least the guests can all eat can eat the suda. They have biyah once, because that's what consummates the wedding, and then they have to separate. Then you have to bury the dead person. And then what does it say? It says very interesting. You don't hold back tachshitin from the kala, because of her avelut, because of her mourning, for an entire 30 days. Alma koshoshim bayanoi. So this teaches us, this is Rashi speaking now, this teaches us that she needs to be beautiful for the entire 30 days. In other words, even when she's in avelut, right? So in the Braita talks about two possibilities: either the Chatan is an avelut or the Kala is an avelut. So the Braita says, essentially, even if she is in avelut, she still we don't hold back tachshitin for her for the entire 30 days. So how is that a proof? What Rabbi Chia now brings it as a proof to answer Rav, how long is a kala considered a kala for Hilchot Yom Kippurim, that she should wash her face on Yom Kippur? So he says 30 days, and I learned it from this Braita. How does he learn it from this Braita? This Braita is not talking about Yom Kippur. It's talking about something else. So how does he learn it from the Braita?
He's learning it from the laws of Avilut can be pushed aside for the Kala in this case. I don't remember, is she allowed to bathe while she's in Avilut? I think it's only the first week though, no?
Well, so here, that in terms of bathing per se is not so important, if in other words, but could be that that's altogether subsumed under the idea of tachshitin.
Beautifying herself. She can't refrain from beautifying herself for those 30 days. And the washing the face is equated to beautifying herself in the case of Yom Kippur.
So, Rabbi Chia is saying, if Chachamim allowed the Kala to have tachshitin even when she was in Avelut, again, under those circumstances where she just got married, but she was also she was an Avelut immediately, and nonetheless, she can have all of her tachshitin for 30 days, it would not be different on Yom Kippur. I can bring a proof from Avelut to Yom Kippur. That's his point. Not that the Braita that he's quoting is talking about Yom Kippur. It's talking about this very special case of Avelut. And that's why he says Kid Tanya, like we learn in the Braita, instead of just saying Tanya, because the Braita doesn't directly address the question of Yom Kippur, but he says it's like we learn in this other case that the Braita brings. So now, since we're here, and I did want to get to this point, I'll read this, and then next time we'll go over this a little bit more. Hachaya, second. Hachaya tin'ol et sandal. So right, this is the next part of the Mishnah. The woman who just gave birth puts on her sandal. And the Gemara says mishum tzina, because of cold. Amar Shmuel, im mechamat sakanat akrav mutar. If it's because of the danger of a scorpion, it's permitted. And Rashi says, im mechamat sakanat akrav, Rashi says, makom sheyesh latush la'akravim mutar l'chol adam, we know. What Shmuel is saying isn't just about the chaya. For the chaya, the reason the chaya puts on her shoe is because of the cold. So why? So then we have to say, okay, so why is a chaya allowed to put on her shoe because of the cold, but nobody else? We'll talk about that next time. And then Shmuel's comment is not a comment about the chaya; it's about everybody. Any place where there's a fear that you might get stung by a scorpion, anyone is allowed to put on their shoe. So I'm going to stop here. And we'll pick this up next time. We'll look at some of these dinim more carefully next time. And in the meantime, I wish everybody a
Mm.
good rest of your evening
Mm.
or the rest
Bye-bye.
of your day. I'll see you
Thank you.
next.
תודה.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good night.
Goodbye.